Have you ever heard of a weapon that everyone believed was impossible to make? What if I told you that this very rifle, initially mocked and dismissed as a ridiculous idea, would go on to become the terror of the trenches in one of history's bloodiest wars? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of the rifle that defied expectations and revolutionized the battlefield. Let's take a step back to the early 20th century, when the world was on the brink of the First World War. The battlefield was a brutal place. Soldiers were entrenched in muddy, cramped trenches, and traditional rifles had proven to be far from ideal for the new style of warfare. The military needed something better, but the weapon industry had largely stuck to old designs. This is where the story of the impossible rifle begins. An idea that seems so absurd, it was laughed at by experts. The year was 1905. A designer, often overlooked in the military circles, came up with a concept for a rifle that would change the face of warfare. But this wasn't just any rifle. It was lighter, more powerful, and far more accurate than anything the military had ever seen. At first, the idea was considered laughable. How could something so radical stand a chance against centuries of tradition? The existing models, though crude, were reliable and had been used for decades. Who needed change? Despite the initial mockery, the designer, driven by his vision, pressed forward. He faced intense skepticism from everyone from high-ranking officers who dismissed the idea as impractical to soldiers who had little faith in something so different. But the key was that it wasn't about the skeptics' opinions, it was about innovation. This rifle wasn't just meant to be a weapon. It was meant to be a force that could break the stagnant cycle of trench warfare. But what was it about this rifle that was so different? Why were military professionals, seasoned by years of warfare, so hesitant to give it a chance? The answer lies not just in its design, but in the very nature of the conflict it was created for. Traditional rifles, though effective, were cumbersome and slow to reload in the heat of battle. Soldiers needed something that could give them a tactical advantage, something that could be used swiftly and efficiently in the close quarters of the trenches. The impossible rifle promised exactly that and more. What's fascinating about this story is that it was more than just about creating a better tool for soldiers. It was about understanding the needs of a soldier in combat, the need for something lightweight, quick to reload, yet powerful enough to take down enemies with precision. The rifle's design, which combined modern mechanics with innovative engineering, would push the boundaries of what was thought possible. Still, even with its groundbreaking features, the reception was less than favorable. Imagine being the creator of something that everyone laughed at, something so radical that the very idea of it seemed like a bad joke. But here's the twist: sometimes the most significant innovations are met with the most resistance. And in the case of this impossible rifle, it would soon prove all its critics wrong in a way no one could have predicted. Now, think about the power of belief in technology. The rifle was derided as impossible, but soon it would become the very thing that no one could live without in the trenches. What was once dismissed as an impractical design would soon change the way wars were fought. The question remains, what made the impossible rifle so powerful, and how did it manage to earn its terrifying reputation on the battlefield? We're just getting started. This story's far from over. Want to know how this seemingly impossible rifle went from mockery to the ultimate weapon of war? Stick around, because in the next section, we're going to dive into the early skepticism and mockery that almost led to its demise, on how it came back to prove everyone wrong. But before we get to that, tell us, what's the most unlikely invention or idea you've seen defy the odds? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying the ride so far. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up with more fascinating stories like this. One imagine a time when the future of warfare was marked by the very people it was meant to serve. The impossible rifle, hailed by its creator as the next big leap in military technology, was met with nothing but ridicule. As groundbreaking as it was, the idea of a rifle capable of drastically changing the tide of battle was far too radical for military leaders and soldiers to embrace at first. They couldn't see past their own preconceptions, and instead of welcoming innovation, they laughed at it. This rifle was dismissed by many as a foolish dream, just a pipe dream that had no place in the world of real warfare. It was in the military barracks and high-ranking officer meetings that the rifle's critics made their voices heard. A toy, they called it. It'll never make a difference, they sneered. Military leaders were entrenched in the traditions of battle. The weaponry of the pastevi, clunky, but reliable had been used for decades to suggest that a lighter, more efficient rifle could replace those. It was unthinkable. It challenged everything they had come to know about warfare. Picture the scene. The creator of this rifle, a designer, whose name would eventually be remembered in history, nervously presenting his vision to a room full of hardened soldiers and officers who couldn't fathom his radical ideas. He was met with dismissive grins and scoffs. As military professionals who had fought in bloody battles, survived grueling conditions, and seen countless weapons come and go, couldn't fathom the possibility that his creation could stand the test of combat. These men weren't just mocking a design. They were dismissing the very notion of change. They were comfortable with what they knew, and anything new was inherently suspect. They had seen weapons fail in the field, designs collapse under the pressure of war, and the thought of a perfect weapon seemed laughable. A rifle that could be reloaded faster, aimed with more precision, and weighed less. It sounded like a Fantaya weapon from some distant future that had no place in the harsh reality of trench warfare. But here's the thing. History is a funny way of making skeptics eat their words. As the impossible rifle was laughed at, tested, and ultimately dismissed by many, something remarkable happened quietly. The rifle started to prove itself. In the face of mockery, it gained momentum in places no one expected. Soldiers who weren't afraid to take risks in battle began to secretly adopt this new weapon, and soon those who had once ridiculed it found themselves in the middle of fierce combat, watching as soldiers wielding the impossible rifle took down enemies with a speed and efficiency that hadn't been seen before. The tension was building. The impossible rifle was slowly starting to show its true potential, but those who had once mocked it were still too proud to admit their error. It wasn't until the rifle was used in real combat that the tide began to turn. Imagine the shift in mentality. Those who had scoffed at its design now had to reconcile with the undeniable fact that they had underestimated it. That's their power of innovation in warfare. Sometimes it's not the generals or the strategists who change the course of history. It's the quiet innovators, the dreamers, who, against all odds, create the tools that shape the future. Now, can you guess how the impossible rifle started to prove itself in the brutal conditions of trench warfare? It wasn't long before its performance in the field changed everything. But before we dive into the game-changing impact it had on the battlefield, let's pause and reflect. Have you ever witnessed something or someone defy the odds and prove all the critics wrong? Let us know in the comments below. What if I told you that this impossible rifle wasn't just a random stroke of genius, but the result of years of painstaking effort, failures, and breakthroughs that defied conventional military thinking. This wasn't just a weapon, it was the result of a designer pushing the boundaries of what was possible, using the knowledge he had gained from the mistakes of others, and blending it with innovation that would later change the very fabric of warfare. The rifle's design was so radical that it seemed like the product of a dreamer, not a practical engineer. But what made this rifle truly revolutionary wasn't just its external features, but the way it functioned. The traditional rifles that soldiers had grown accustomed to were cumbersome, slow to reload, and often too heavy to be wielded effectively in close-quarters combat. The battlefield of World War I, however, required a weapon that could adapt to the chaos of trench warfare. And that's exactly what the Impossible Rifle was designed to do. The genius behind the rifle lay in its combination of modern mechanics with innovative engineering. The designer, who had spent years studying the failings of existing rifles, knew exactly what needed to change. The problem wasn't necessarily the firing power of the rifles, but the way they were used. Soldiers needed something lighter, quicker, and more versatile rifle that could be easily maneuvered in tight spaces and could offer unparalleled speed in reloading without sacrificing power. The breakthrough came in the form of a streamlined design that incorporated a faster, more efficient loading mechanism. The rifle's internal system was far less prone to jamming, allowing for quicker follow-up shots. It utilized a unique mechanism for ammunition feeding, which set it apart from its predecessors. It wasn't just about being faster. It was about being more reliable, even under the worst conditions. And let's not forget the rifle's weight. Most rifles at the time were bulky, heavy, and impractical in the muck and mire of the trenches. This new rifle was lighter than its competitors, allowing soldiers to carry it with ease through difficult terrain. The perfect balance of power, speed, and maneuverability, this was what the designer had achieved. But none of this would matter if the rifle didn't have the accuracy needed to ensure that soldiers could hit their targets in the chaos of combat. That was another part of the genius. This rifle was designed for precision, combining accuracy with rapid fire. It was more than just a weapon, it was a tool that empowered soldiers to act quickly and decisively, while still hitting their targets with deadly efficiency. It was a rifle that could make a difference in the heat of battle, and it was tailor-made for the unforgiving conditions of the trenches. And yet, despite all of this innovation, there was still one major hurdle to overcome: the skepticism of the very people who needed this rifle the most. Even as the design was tested and refined, the military remained hesitant. They couldn't fathom how a toy rifle could make any real difference in the brutal, life-or-death world of trench warfare. The weight of tradition was still too strong, and many officers simply couldn't see the potential of something so different. But as we know, the best innovations often come when they're needed the most. And this rifle, despite all odds, was about to prove its worth in a way no one could have imagined. Now, as we move into the next chapter, you might be wondering how this rifle so radical, so new actually performed when it finally saw action on the front lines. The tension is building, and the real test is just ahead. Imagine standing at the edge of a trench, your rifle in hand, knowing that everything you've been told to believe about warfare is about to be tested. You've heard all the jokes, the mocking whispers behind your back, the dismissive laughter about the impossible rifle, but here you are, faced with a brutal enemy, and you're about to put that rifle to its first real test. The moment of truth has arrived. The impossible rifle, a weapon that had been laughed at by generals, derided as a joke by fellow soldiers, was about to prove its worth in a way no one had expected. The battlefield, with its chaotic and unforgiving nature, would soon reveal if this so-called toy could actually stand up to the horrors of war. And the moment it was put into action, the rifle silenced all of its critics. It wasn't the massive battles or the grand strategies that first tested the rifle. It was the brutal reality of trench warfare, close quarters, extreme conditions, and the constant pressure of living in a narrow, confined space where every movement could mean life or death. The rifle's first deployment came in the heat of a desperate fight, where every advantage was crucial, and soldiers needed a weapon they could trust. This was the proving ground. In the chaos of the trenches, the rifle performed in ways no one could have predicted. Soldiers who had initially scoffed at its design found themselves relying on it in moments of extreme need. Its speed, accuracy, and lightweight design made it an invaluable asset. Soldiers who had once doubted its effectiveness began to see the truth it was everything they needed and more. The rifle's first real test didn't come in the way many had expected. It wasn't about performing perfectly under ideal conditions. It was about adapting to the harsh realities of warfare, being reliable when everything else seemed to fall apart. And that's exactly what it did. Soldiers found that the rifle was not only fast but remarkably accurate, even when conditions were less than ideal. Its design allowed for rapid follow-up shots, and it didn't jam under pressure. The speed of reloading was another key factor in the rifle's success in the trenches, where time was always against them and ammunition was constantly in demand. The ability to reload quickly meant everything. Soldiers were no longer struggling with cumbersome mechanisms that slowed them down in the heat of battle. Instead, they had a weapon that could deliver consistent, rapid fire, making every shot count. The impossible rifle was no longer a joke. It had proven itself in the most critical of situations, where every moment mattered and where failure wasn't an option. The soldiers who had once mocked the weapon were now telling stories of how it saved their lives on the battlefield. The tide was turning. But while the rifle was gaining the respect of soldiers on the front lines, the officers who had originally dismissed it remained reluctant to admit they had been wrong. Even as its performance became undeniable, the high-ranking officers couldn't bring themselves to admit that the impossible rifle had, in fact, changed everything. This moment of hesitation among the military brass only added to the rifle's legend. It wasn't just that it had proven itself in battle, it was that it had done so despite the entire military establishment thinking it would fail. And that, more than anything, is what made the rifle's success so extraordinary. As the rifle continued to be used in combat, its reputation grew. Soldiers began to rely on it more and more, and its performance continued to surpass expectations. The doubts that had surrounded it slowly turned into stories of triumph. But the question remained, would the rifle's success be enough to change the course of the war? And would the high-ranking officers ever acknowledge the role this impossible weapon had played in the outcome of battle? The tension is building. The full impact of the rifle's success is yet to be realized, and the story is far from over. Stay tuned, because in the next part, we're diving into how this impossible rifle became a game-changer in trench warfare, defying all odds to alter the course of battles in ways no one could have predicted. What do you think happens when an idea that was laughed at finally proves itself on the battlefield? The impossible rifle, once considered a mere novelty, had just taken the first step toward revolutionizing trench warfare. But the real test was still ahead. Could it truly surpass the expectations set for it? Could it live up to the hype that was slowly beginning to form around it? It didn't take long for the answer to become clear. The rifle that had been ridiculed was now making its mark in combat in ways that no one had anticipated. Soldiers, who had once doubted its usefulness, began to see it as a tool for survival. The mockery had turned to admiration, but this wasn't just about proving critics wrong. It was about how the rifle changed the game in the trenches. As the impossible rifle was put through its paces, it began to demonstrate qualities that were far superior to anything its predecessors could offer. The first major advantage was its unparalleled speed. The rifle's ability to reload quickly meant that soldiers weren't left exposed, fumbling with their weapons in the heat of battle. The simple yet effective design allowed soldiers to fire and reload faster than ever before, a feature that quickly became indispensable. Soldiers who were caught in the crossfire found that they could fire more shots in less time, increasing their chances of survival. They were no longer limited by the slow and cumbersome reloading mechanisms that had previously slowed them down. This newfound speed meant that they could engage targets with greater frequency and accuracy, giving them an edge over their enemies who had not yet adapted to the changing pace of warfare. But speed wasn't the only factor that set this rifle apart. Its accuracy also far surpassed that of other rifles on the field. The precision with which soldiers could hit targets, whether at a distance or in close quarters, was a game. In the trenches, where soldiers often had to shoot under pressure, the impossible rifle gave them the confidence to take their shots with pinpoint accuracy. The ability to maintain a steady aim and hit targets effectively even under fire was invaluable. In the heat of battle, where everything could change in an instant, the rifle provided soldiers with the reliability they needed to stay focused and confident in their abilities. The once derided weapon had transformed into a symbol of precision and effectiveness, and its performance was becoming legendary. But it wasn't just the soldiers on the front lines who noticed this rifle's superiority. Was the commanders as well? The military brass, who had initially dismissed the rifle, couldn't ignore its impact on the battlefield for much longer. The weapon was being credited with helping soldiers hold their ground in ways that had previously been impossible. The unexpected success of the rifle forced commanders to reconsider their stance on innovation and technology. They couldn't deny its effectiveness any longer. One of the key moments that solidified the rifle's place in history came when it was used in a series of crucial offensives. The rifle's ability to consistently perform under pressure, even in the most harrowing of conditions, proved to be a turning point in several key battles. In situations where other weapons had failed, the impossible rifle stood firm, delivering shots with remarkable accuracy and speed. The rifle became more than just a tool. It became a symbol of innovation, defying all expectations. Soldiers who once doubted it now saw it as their most valuable asset. The mockery had turned into reverence, and soon the impossible rifle was seen as a crucial part of the military's strategy. What's fascinating is that the rifle didn't just prove itself in a single battle. It continued to perform consistently over time, becoming a staple in the arsenals of soldiers fighting in trench warfare. Its success wasn't just a fluke. It was the result of careful design, innovative thinking, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. What was once dismissed as impossible had now become an essential part of military operations. But as the rifle's success continued to spread, so did the whispers of its impact. Word began to travel across the front lines, and soon other armies took notice. Would this impossible rifle become the new standard in military technology? And what would that mean for future weapons and tactics? The tension is building. The rifle that had once been laughed at was now changing the course of history, and the world was starting to take notice. But the story is far from over. In the next chapter, We'll dive into how this revolutionary weapon not only shifted the balance of power on the battlefield, but also led to a reevaluation of military strategies as a whole. The battlefield had changed forever. What had started as a joke, a mere toy that no one took seriously, was now becoming a key asset in the brutal world of trench warfare. The impossible rifle, once ridiculed for its radical design and impractical features, was proving to be exactly what soldiers had been desperately waiting for. The rifle had not only surpassed the expectations of its critics, it had fundamentally altered the way wars were fought in the trenches. The transition from mockery to acceptance wasn't instantaneous. It took time for the soldiers to realize the true value of the rifle, especially as it performed in real combat situations. But once they saw its effectiveness, there was no turning back. The impossible rifle was now an integral part of daily life in the trenches. Its true value lay in its ability to deliver rapid, precise fire. The trenches were a nightmare of mud, barbed wire, and constant gunfire. Soldiers often had to fight in conditions where visibility was poor and movement was restricted. In such a confined space, traditional rifles simply couldn't keep up with the pace of the battle. But the impossible rifle was different. It was fast, accurate, and most importantly, it gave soldiers an edge they'd never had before. Soldiers who had once relied on bulky, cumbersome rifles now found themselves with a weapon that could be easily maneuvered in tight spaces. The rifle's compact design made it perfect for the narrow confines of the trenches, where every second counted and every shot had to be precise. The faster reloading mechanism meant soldiers weren't left vulnerable in those critical moments when they had to reload, and the rifle's accuracies ensured that they hit their targets with deadly efficiency. But the true game changer was the way the rifle altered the soldier's mindset. In the trenches, where fear and uncertainty were constant companions, soldiers now had a sense of confidence. They knew they had a weapon that could give them the upper hand, a weapon that could help them hold their ground and fight back against the relentless onslaught of enemy fire. The impossible rifle wasn't just another weapon in the arsenal, it became a symbol of hope. In a war that seemed endless, where soldiers were stuck in mud-filled trenches for days, weeks, and months on end, the rifle became a vital tool for survival. Its rapid-fire capabilities gave soldiers the ability to retaliate with speed and accuracy, forcing the enemy to rethink their tactics. As word of the rifle's success spread, it didn't take long for its influence to grow. Soldiers from all corners of the battlefield were clamoring for the impossible rifle, demanding that it be issued to their units. It wasn't just that the rifle was effective, it was changing the very nature of how battles were fought in the trenches. The impact of the rifle was felt not just on the front lines, but in the higher echelons of military leadership as well. The success of the impossible rifle forced generals and commanders to reconsider their strategies and rethink the types of weapons they relied on. In a world where technological advancements could tip the balance of power, the rifle's success highlighted the importance of innovation in warfare. By now, the once mocked rifle had earned its place as one of the most essential tools in trench warfare. It had proven itself not only in the hands of soldiers on the front lines, but also as a key player in the shifting strategies of military commanders. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of adaptation, a reminder that in war, as in life, sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from those willing to challenge the status quo. But how did the rifle's success lead to even more dramatic changes in military strategy and the very nature of combat? The story doesn't end here. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the rifle's impact continued to grow, influencing not only the tactics, on the ground, but also sparking further innovations that would change the future of warfare. Imagine being a soldier in the trenches, constantly under fire, fighting in cramped, wet conditions. The weight of your gear, the relentless noise, and the constant threat of death or injury are ever present. Every second counts. Now, imagine that you're armed with a rifle that gives you an edge over your enemy, as a rifle that allows you to shoot faster, reload quicker, and hit your target with remarkable precision. That's the reality that the impossible rifle brought to the soldiers who wielded it. The tactical advantages it provided were not just small tweaks. They were for a soldier entrenched in the muck and chaos of the battlefield. The difference between life and death could come down to milliseconds. The ability to reload faster could mean getting that crucial shot off before an enemy had the chance to react. The precision it offered meant that soldiers could take out targets from a distance, eliminating threats before they ever got close enough to pose a danger. But the true power of the impossible rifle lay in its ability to enhance a soldier's overall effectiveness. No longer did they have to rely on brute force or sheer numbers. With this rifle, they could engage enemies with speed and accuracy, putting them on the offensive in situations that had once been solely defensive. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack, soldiers armed with the impossible rifle could strike first, taking control of the situation. In trench warfare, where soldiers were often stuck in their positions for days at a time, this shift in tactics was revolutionary. The rifle allowed soldiers to maintain a level of offensive capability even while on the defensive. It gave them a fighting chance, allowing them to challenge the enemy even when the odds seemed insurmountable. With its quick reloading system and ease of use, soldiers could focus more on their environment, using their surroundings to their advantage and reacting swiftly to changing conditions. But it wasn't just about speed and accuracy. The rifle's design also allowed soldiers to operate more efficiently in close-quarters combat, a common occurrence in the trenches. In these tight spaces, soldiers often had to maneuver around obstacles or enemy positions, requiring a rifle that was not only powerful but also lightweight and adaptable. The impossible rifle fit this need perfectly, making it the go-to weapon for soldiers who found themselves in the most confined and dangerous conditions. As the war raged on, the tactical advantages of the impossible rifle became more and more apparent. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a forced multiplier. Its impact extended beyond the battlefield, influencing the way soldiers thought about combat and the role of technology in warfare. The more soldiers used it, the more they realized that this rifle wasn't just about personal service, it was about changing the very dynamics of battle. In fact, the impossible rifle's design and features would go on to influence the development of future weapons, creating a ripple effect that would shape military strategy for years to come. The simplicity, speed, and precision that this rifle introduced would become the foundation for future innovations, making it a cornerstone of military technology. But its impact didn't stop at the soldier level. It began to shape the very strategies employed by commanders on the battlefield. The impossible rifle was a force that couldn't be ignored, and its influence would soon be felt in ways no one could have predicted. How would military leaders adapt to this new reality? And what changes would the rifle inspire in the way battles were fought? Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we're diving into the deeper impact of this revolutionary weapon on military strategy and how it forced a re-evaluation of tactics across the board. The story of the impossible rifle is far from over. As the impossible rifle continued to prove its worth on the front lines, its impact began to ripple outward, far beyond the trenches. It wasn't just the soldiers in the field who were taking notice. High-ranking officers, strategists, and military innovators were starting to realize that this seemingly radical weapon was changing the game in ways they hadn't anticipated. The implications went beyond the rifle itself. It was about how this new weapon could shape future military strategy and spur technological innovation on the battlefield. One of the most significant shifts was the realization that combat was evolving. Trench warfare had been a static, grinding type of conflict. Soldiers huddled in trenches, battling for small gains with little room for maneuver. The introduction of the impossible rifle, with its speed and accuracy, allowed for a more dynamic form of warfare. The rifle gave soldiers the ability to act quickly and decisively, making every shot count. This wasn't just about firing blindly into enemy positions. It was about precision, tactics, and taking the initiative. For military strategists, this was a wake-up call. The battlefield was no longer going to be defined by sheer force or overwhelming numbers. It was about the quality of the soldier's weapon and the efficiency with which they could use it. The speed and effectiveness of the impossible rifle meant that commanders could now rethink their approach to warfare. No longer did they have to rely on entrenched positions and slow-moving advancements. The impossible rifle opened up new tactical possibilities suddenly. Infantry could move faster, engage targets from a greater distance, and maintain fire superiority in ways they hadn't before. This was a huge turning point for military leaders. The impossible rifle made it clear that technological innovation wasn't just about new machines or vehicles. It was about how soldiers interacted with their environment, how they could use their weapons more effectively, and how those weapons could change the nature of combat itself. For the first time in modern warfare, the individual soldier had a weapon that allowed them to take on a far more active role in battle. The idea of a one-man army had never seemed more plausible. As the rifle's success became undeniable, it began to inspire further innovation in military technology. Engineers and designers started thinking outside the box, looking for ways to improve on the impossible rifle's design and create new weapons that could offer the same advantages in speed, accuracy, and reliability. This shift in thinking didn't just affect rifles, it set the stage for the development of future weapons, from machine guns to tanks, and even the evolution of modern firearms that would continue to shape warfare for the decades to come. At the same time, the rifle also forced a re-evaluation of military training. No longer could soldiers be simply trained to use traditional rifles in a static, defensive manner. They needed to learn how to use a weapon that demanded quick thinking, precision, and adaptability. Training programs evolved to focus more on accuracy, reloading speed, and battlefield agility skills that were essential for using the impossible rifle effectively. Soldiers were no longer just soldiers, they were marksmen, able to adapt to the fast-paced demands of modern warfare. Even the nature of combat tactics was affected. The rifle's ability to allow for quick engagements and precise shooting meant that soldiers could take control of the battlefield in ways that were previously unthinkable. Infantry units began to adopt new tactics that incorporated the rifle's strengths, creating a dynamic form of combat that shifted the balance away from the traditional, slow-moving trench warfare of the past. As word of the rifle's effectiveness spread, other nations and armies began to take notice. The impossible rifle wasn't just changing the way battles were fought, it was forcing other military forces to rethink their strategies and technological advancements. The rifle's success became a model for future weaponry, leading to a global push for innovation in military technology. What started as an impossible idea had turned into a catalyst for a new era of warfare, where technology and strategy went hand in hand to redefine how wars were fought. But even as the rifle influence grew, the questions remained. How would this change the future of warfare. And what were the long-term implications of having a weapon that could so dramatically alter the dynamics of battle? We're on the edge of a new chapter where the true legacy of this revolutionary weapon is just beginning to unfold. Stay tuned, because in the next part, we're going to explore how the impossible rifle's success influenced not just the battlefield, but the very course of history itself. As the rifle continued to prove its worth on the front lines, it wasn't just the soldiers who relied on it that recognized its significance. The military as a whole was beginning to grasp the true value of this impossible weapon. What started as a joke, something ridiculed by officers and dismissed by skeptics, had now become a legendary piece of military technology. The rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of innovation, persistence, and the power of challenging conventional thinking. The impact of the impossible rifle didn't stop with its battlefield success. It went on to shape the future of military strategy and weaponry for years to come. The key was that this wasn't just about one successful weapon, it was about the mindset shift it represented. The impossible rifle pushed the boundaries of what soldiers could achieve on the battlefield and made the entire military machine rethink how it approached combat. After the war, the legacy of the impossible rifle became woven into the fabric of military history. As armies across the globe looked for ways to modernize their arsenals, they looked back to the innovations that had proven effective during the war. The rifle's combination of speed, accuracy, and maneuverability became a template for future military weapons. But it wasn't just about the design of the rifle, it was about the way it empowered soldiers. The rifle had given them the confidence to act decisively, to move quickly, and to engage enemies with precision. It had become a tool that not only helped soldiers survive in the chaos of battle, but also gave them the upper hand in critical moments. The rifle's legacy was tied to the idea that a soldier's most important asset wasn't just their strength or endurance, it was their ability to adapt to the demands of modern warfare and use technology to their advantage. This legacy continued to influence the development of military rifles long after the war ended. The speed and precision that the impossible rifle brought to the battlefield were incorporated into future designs, leading to the creation of more advanced weapons that would continue to shape the course of warfare. The advancements that the rifle sparked didn't just make soldiers more effective on the battlefield, they helped transform the way military strategy was developed and executed. The impossible rifle also left a lasting impact on the way military leaders viewed innovation. It showed them that the willingness to embrace new ideas, even when they seemed impractical or impossible, could lead to breakthroughs that had the potential to change the course of history. It was a reminder that progress often comes from the most unexpected places, from individuals who are willing to challenge the status quo and defy conventional thinking. Its legacy wasn't just in the weapon itself, but in the ripple effect it created, one that inspired countless inventors, engineers, and military leaders to think differently about how war was fought. It encouraged a shift toward prioritizing the needs of the soldier on the ground, acknowledging that innovation wasn't just about creating bigger and more powerful machines, it was about making the tools of war more effective, efficient, and adaptable to the changing nature of combat. As the years passed, the impossible rifle became a symbol of how even the most unlikely ideas could transform the world. The war it was part of may have ended, but the lessons learned from that rifle continued to shape military technology and strategy to this day. It's a testament to the power of innovation and the impact it can have when it's embraced by those willing to break from tradition. In the end, the impossible rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was a reminder of how one revolutionary idea could change the course of history. Against all odds, it could go from being laughed at to becoming the very thing that altered the trajectory of war. And its legacy shaped by the soldiers who carried it and the battles it helped win, would forever be remembered as one of the most surprising, impactful chapters in military history. Now that we've explored the incredible legacy of this impossible rifle, let's dive into the final chapter of our story. Stay tuned, as we'll take a closer look at how the rifle's story has been remembered and honored, and how it continues to inspire innovation to this day. As with many great innovations, the story of the impossible rifle is not just about the weapon itself, it's about the people who believed in it, trusted it, and used it to change the course of history. The soldiers who carried this rifle into battle were, in many ways, the silent heroes of the story. While their names may not be as famous as the generals or commanders who led the armies, it was these soldiers facing death and destruction every day who saw firsthand what the rifle could do. They were the ones who understood its power long before the higher-ups acknowledged its impact. In the trenches, there was no time for doubt. Soldiers were thrust into battle, often with little more than the clothes on their backs and the weapons in their hands. For those who trusted the impossible rifle, it became more than just a tool, it became a lifeline. It was the weapon that allowed them to stand their ground when everything around them seemed to be falling apart. It was the rifle that gave them a sense of control in a situation where chaos and fear reigned supreme. These soldiers, many of whom had been skeptical at first, had come to rely on the rifle's precision and reliability. They understood that this was not just another weapon, it was the key to survival in a world where every moment could be your last. And as they carried the rifle into the heart of battle, they not only changed the course of the war, they changed the perception of what was possible on the battlefield. What's fascinating is that, despite the rifle's incredible performance and eventual legacy, many of the soldiers who wielded it never sought recognition. They didn't need medals or fame, they simply wanted to survive, to protect their comrades, and to do their part in the fight. For them, the impossible rifle was just another tool, but it was one that made all the difference. As the war ended, many of these soldiers returned home, their stories largely untold. Some kept their rifles as keepsakes, a reminder of the battle they had fought. Others left the war behind and moved on with their lives, never fully acknowledging the role the rifle had played in their survival. But their actions spoke volumes. The soldiers who had trusted the rifle were the ones who had made its success a reality. They were the ones who had proven time and time again that sometimes the most unlikely of weapons could change the course of history. In the years that followed, the story of the impossible rifle became a legend. It wasn't just the weapon's design or its performance that made it legendary. It was the soldiers who trusted it, the soldiers who used it when everything was on the line. Their courage, determination, and willingness to embrace something new in the face of uncertainty are what made the rifle more than just a tool. It made it a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of innovation. Now, as we look back on this incredible story, we realize that the impossible rifle was more than just a weapon. It was a testament to the power of human ingenuity, to the bravery of the soldiers who believed in it, and to the lasting legacy of those who carried it into the most challenging battles of their lives. So, as we close the chapter on the impossible rifle, we want to hear from you. What do you think is the most important innovation in military history? How do you think it has shaped the wars of today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to leave a like if you've enjoyed this journey through the history of one of the most legendary weapons ever created. If you made it this far, you're part of the story now. So, hit that subscribe button, share this video with others, and tell us in the comments what you think the next great military innovation might be. And as always, thank you for watching this story. Like so many others, deserves to be remembered.